In this module, we will define the animal production system as it fits in the context of food production. We examine the animal health and welfare needs in the system and some concerns related to the well-being of animals in food production.
I think in general terms, I'd say animal production is involved in generating any kind of products that we consume, so dairy, eggs, meat products, or generating fiber, wool, hair, different kinds of fibers from animals, and then even generating inedible products or non-consumable products. There are many of those that come from animals. But if you take the food products and then the fiber, that's the overwhelming majority that animal production is involved in.
Well, it ties right in with this themes of sustainability and identifying, what are the pressures on the system, and, how do we identify real problems from perceived problems. And welfare is also a systems problem. So
Okay.
There's a lot of parallel there. So when we think about animal welfare, there are actually 3 pillars of welfare. And so there's the biological function, affective state, and then how well the animal is paired to its needs. And so we use a very similar model to the sustainability model, the 3-pillar model. And when we think about what's the welfare state of the animal, we have to consider all of those pillars at the same time. And so we might be looking at the biological state of the animal, which is doing very well, but we then might look at the affective state and see there are a lot of challenges. So biological state is all of the autonomous regulation, so the things that happen automatically. Affective state is about the perceptions of the animal and how it experiences the world. And then that 3rd pillar is essentially asking, does the animal have the things that it needs in its environment? So an example of that might be, does a chicken have a place to scratch because it has an innate need to scratch? And if it doesn't have that ability to scratch, it's going to create another mechanism to alleviate that desire to scratch. And it might turn out that it creates a negative affective state or a negative biological. So those kind of intertwine with one another.
What about beef and pork? Are there other kind of misnomers or misinterpretations?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think with pork, it's been an issue for a while now. People are concerned with the gestation crates, the farrowing crates. So the enclosures that the animals are put in, the sows that are put in before they have their litters of piglets. And it does restrict the movement of the sow, but primarily that's done to be able to control the sow's food intake, to make sure she's getting enough food. Because if you put groups of sows together, competitions arise, and it's more difficult to ensure that every animal is getting the resources that she needs. But also, just in the natural behavior of the animal, if you don't have the animal in some kind of enclosure, you do lose more piglets because the sow may roll over on them. And so, it's not intentional on the part of the sow, but it's just something that can happen when those kinds of protections aren't in place. So a lot of animal scientists that work with swine are working on, okay, how can we provide greater freedom, but also recognize these other challenges that were the reason those enclosures were developed in the first place. So you have to deal with the initial challenges and now try to think of them in a different way.
Actual practices of production, livestock have become, I think, managed better than human healthcare in many cases, quite honestly. If you were to go to a modern dairy now and look at the practices, or a modern hog facility and look at the practices of production, it's truly astounding to me to say, wait, you know the temperature and health condition of that animal every single day, every hour of the day, when it was moving, when it wasn't, and yet I show up today with a cold and we don't know why.
So a lot of times it first manifests as wanting animals to have much more freedom than is really economically feasible, but also much more freedom than would be in the best interests of the animals. And poultry is a great example of that. We can certainly do free-range production, and there are many free-range producers that understand how to do that and do their best to take care of the animals. But inevitably, it exposes the animals to more predators and more disease, more temperature extremes. So it's really a balance. You have to decide how much do you value providing that greater freedom relative to the increased risks that it introduces.
So animal welfare in the history of science is a fairly new science. So some of the scientific principles are still evolving and emerging. One of them being, how do we evaluate welfare? How do we evaluate a complex system with a set of principles that covers all cases? So even in the time that I've been a scientist, we went from the 5 freedoms to the 3 pillars, and there's currently an emerging kind of advancement on the 3 pillars, and the name for it hasn't even settled yet, so I can't give it a name. But because like the 5 freedoms tend to be very siloed, and so there are cases where we need to think about, the 5 freedoms actually focus on the negatives, and they don't acknowledge the positives. So when we talk about the 5 freedoms, it's avoiding negative things, but nowhere in the 5 freedoms does it give a benefit to providing positive things. So then when we progress to the 3 pillars, we can go both ways, right? Each pillar can be positively influenced or negatively influenced. And then as we move forward into the next version, there are still gaps. So there's still gaps in those pillars when we try to think of scenarios for how does an animal experience its world.
Animal production and the byproducts produced from animals are essential components of the food production systems. We consider the health and well-being of animals in the food system and how we manage animal health and well-being in the context of social, environmental, and economic sustainability.